Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. I thank you for watching. In this video I want to spend some time talking about Judaism. I'm going to say some things about the general worldview that we see developed in Jewish thinking, and then I want to say some things, some very general things about the theory of human nature that we see follow from and develop from Jewish thinking. So as many of you know, the key source for Jewish thought is the Hebrew Bible. Sometimes it's referred to as the Torah. Sometimes the Torah is used narrowly to refer to the first 5 books of the Bible, but it could also be used more broadly to refer to the Hebrew Bible as a whole. It even has even broader meanings, but for the purposes of this video, when I speak of the Torah, I'm speaking of the Hebrew Bible as a whole, and not just exclusively the first 5 books of that book. So when we think about Judaism, you should be thinking about God as the center of the religion, the one God as at the center of the religion, the God that was revealed to Abraham. So Judaism is the first of the big 3 Abrahamic religions, the other 2 being Christianity and Islam. Judaism being the oldest religion of the Abrahamic religions. So Abraham is the key figure. God promised, as many of you know, early on in the Torah, a great lineage to Abraham, so Abraham is a key figure, a key patriarch, you could say, and as I've mentioned, the Jews have at the cornerstone of their worldview is the idea of God, and God as the law giver. Torah just means law, and this God commands of his people that his people be good. So sometimes Judaism is considered a kind of ethical monotheism because it's an ethical religion. God gives us laws that tell us how we should live our lives, and then it's a monotheistic worldview because there's one God. The mono means one, and the theism means God. So there's one God. So ethical monotheism is sometimes the way Judaism is characterized. So God, on the Jewish view, has it that God is the creator of the universe, but it's not as if God just creates the world and then just lets it go. But God is the continual sustainer of the universe. God is completely good himself. God is completely powerful, and God is completely knowing. So God has the big 3 omni, sometimes it's put. God is omnipotent, all-powerful. God is all-knowing, omniscient, and God is omnibenevolent. That means all good. God is, on the Jewish worldview, he is transcendent in the sense that God is beyond us, and beyond us in an infinite kind of way. But God is also immanent. God is also someone who intervenes in history, and God is someone who responds to prayer from his followers. And so God is both transcendent and immanent on a Jewish worldview. When you think about Judaism, as I've mentioned, you should also be thinking about the Torah. The Torah is considered to be revealed religion. When we're talking about the Hebrew Bible, we're talking about scriptures, we're talking about sacred scriptures, and we're talking about written words that were inspired by God, given to us, revealed to us by God, and given to the Jews specifically. Now, the bedrock of the Jewish faith in terms of the ethical monotheism that I mentioned before, the 10 Commandments, as many of you know, given to Moses on Mount Sinai. And so many of us know the 10 Commandments, but the 10 Commandments, just for our purposes, serve as the bedrock and the basis for Jewish law, even though there are many others, hundreds of other laws that are part of Jewish law. Another key feature of the worldview of Judaism is the fact of covenant, the fact that God makes covenants with his people. So God made a covenant with Abraham to multiply. his lineage, and there are certain signs of the covenant, and the sign of the covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, is circumcision, and like all covenants, there's promises on both sides. There's the promise on God's side to multiply Abraham's people, and there's a promise that Abraham is supposed to follow God's laws. There's also the covenant that was made with Noah, as many of you know. The covenant made being that God has certain promises. Noah has certain promises. They both have to fulfill their sides. Of course, with Noah had to build the ark to start the world anew, and God promises never to flood the earth again. So that's just an example of significant features of the Jewish worldview, is that God actually makes covenants, makes promises and agreements with his people. There's also the idea of election. That's a prominent part of Judaism. Election here being that the Jews are in some sense the chosen ones. There's different meanings of this, but a standard traditional meaning is that the Jews as a people play a central role as God's people in fulfilling what God wants done here on earth. So election is a key concept that we find in the Jewish worldview. We also have the idea of the Messiah, or as the one who is to be a future redeemer of the Jewish people. Sometimes it's said that the future redeemer of the state of Israel, as the leader of Israel, who will deliver the Jewish people from foreign subjugation and all the rest. Now, when it comes to thinking about Judaism and the afterlife, most of the development of theories of the afterlife, whether or not there's a body resurrection or a soul resurrection, these ideas develop post-biblically or post-Torah. So there are views, Jewish views according to which the body resurrects. There are views according to which the soul leaves the body. But as it stands, there's an emphasis traditionally when we think about Judaism on this life and living up to God's commands in this life. So that just is supposed to give you a sense of Judaism. Some of the key ideas here that I went over, just to recap and review them. Center stage, think about Judaism as the idea of God, and God as someone who issues laws that we're to live up to, that God's people to live up to, and the chosen ones of God were the Jews. That has different meanings, but just keep in mind that it's just a traditional view of Judaism that the Jewish people who have their origins in Abraham, they are chosen by God to live up to God's law for various purposes here on earth. God is a good God. God is a powerful God. God's an all-knowing God, and God is transcendent in the sense that God is beyond us, but God is also immanent in the fact that God works in human history, and God responds and answers prayers, and that the basis of God's law, the Ten Commandments, given to us by God through Moses on Mount Sinai. And I also just mentioned the idea that God is a God, according to the Jews, who makes covenants, makes agreements with promises on both sides with his people. And as examples of those covenants, the Abrahamic and the Noahic covenant. Okay, so that just gives some background in thinking about Judaism. The theory of human nature that emerges from Judaism, well, we see that it's difficult to work out a precise philosophy of the theory of human nature when we study Torah, but some key ideas come out that are worth mentioning in thinking about you could say the Jewish conception, the traditional Jewish conception of human nature. Well, we know that it's human nature to be such that we are dependent on God for our existence, that we come from God as our creator. And so it's human nature to be a created being, created by God. It's also true to say that we are created as human beings, in some sense, in God's image. Now, that has different meanings. Sometimes it's meant that that we, like God, have reason and will. Sometimes it's said that we have a personality, or that we are persons like God is a person. There are different interpretations of what exactly it means, but whatever interpretation is the right one, the Torah tells us that we are made in God's image. And so it's human nature to be made in God's image. So when God made us in his own image in some sense. So that's another key thing to take from thinking about the Jewish theory of human nature. Precise meaning, okay, we don't need to get we don't need to figure that out. I don't think we're going to be able to figure that out in a short video on Judaism. I just wanted to throw that out there. So the first two things: one, we're created beings, created by God, and two, we're created in God's image. Now, we also know, according to Torah, that Adam and Eve, they're the first human beings, and that there was a time when they lived in a Garden of Eden, which was a very pristine place to live in without any imperfection, and they were given the tree of life to subsist on. And then they were told by God, commanded by God, not to eat of a certain tree. And we know the story, I think, that Adam and Eve ended up sinning. Adam gets told to not eat of a certain tree. Presumably he told Eve this. And Eve gets tempted by a serpent in the garden to eat of this tree that she was told not to eat of. And then she tells Adam, and Adam eats of the tree as well. And so both Adam and Eve sin. They fall short of what God commanded them to do. And this is significant because as a result of these free choices, according to Jewish thought, Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden. And certain consequences emerge from this that are significant for thinking about human nature. So we know that that in terms of thinking about like our human nature, well, we have free will. God gave us free will, and the free will seems to be part of what makes possible our ability to make choices, either the choices for what God commands us to do, or choices against what God commands us to do, as we see in the story of Adam and Eve. So part of our nature as human beings is to be free. We have free will, but we also see that as a consequence of the use of our free will, that we are subject to a harder life than we would have had otherwise. And this isn't just true for Adam and Eve, but this is true for the descendants of Adam and Eve, that somehow what Adam and Eve did in the garden, it's something that influenced the rest of humanity. It, as it were, sometimes it's put in a later Christian tradition, it tainted humanity. So this isn't an idea that the Jews accept, the idea of original sin, which we're going to talk about when we get to a figure named St. Augustine. But it's important to note that though the idea of original sin isn't a developed part of the Jewish theology, it still is true and recognized by Jewish theology and philosophy, for that matter, that the fall in the garden by Adam and Eve had negative impact on the future generations of human beings. And so we see, for example, that as a result of the fall, according to the Torah, that man and woman, for that matter, but humanity's going to have to toil and work the land in order to get our food. Before we were eating off of these delicious trees in the garden. And then we also know that there's such thing as pain in childbirth, which didn't exist, which wasn't supposed to exist, but now does as a result of the fall in the garden. So the fall in the garden had a negative impact on our nature as we used our free will. So just to recap, parts of our free will were created by God, or parts of our human nature were created by God. We're created in God's image. We have free will, and as a result of the use of our free will, as that is shown and exemplified in Adam and Eve in the garden, certain negative effects have occurred to humanity. So that captures what I want to say about Judaism. Thank you for watching, everybody. Have a great one.